Just going to go back just a minute, make sure everybody's in the right place. So today our topic is, and this is in our monthly webinar series that we offer for our clients as a service, JER, HR Group, Trainery, Nexa Learning, getting the right people in the right seats as the market tightens. And we have a selection tool that helps quite a bit called PXT Select. We'll be talking about that. So as I said, joining us today is John Wing, our Business Development Specialist, and I am Director of Organizational Development and Learning. So I didn't see anybody post anything right away as to your challenges, but as things come up, feel free to post in chat and Q&A, and we'll try to address questions, and we will have a Q&A section at the end. John's going to start us off in a minute, but first just a little bit about JER, HR Group. We like to say we focus on human capital, people as the greatest resource for an organization. So we have quite a number of years and experience with all of our various organizations and consultants and working in this arena. So we have software-driven solutions for compensation, training delivery, training tracking, HR resources. We have a group called HR Delegate. If you go to jerhrgroup.com, you can see more about that for helping with your current HR task and services. And then we have organizational development division. And then within our technology solutions, in addition to the training and the compensation, we also have a review cloud tool, which is an online-based performance management system. John has over 25 years of management and business development, worked across North Carolina and Florida. Currently serves on the board of directors for the Human Resource Management Association of Greensboro. That's the SHRM chapter for Greensboro, North Carolina. I lead the organizational development and learning function and am certified through Wiley Publishing's Everything Disc, PXT Select, 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team, and I'm certified through the Association for Talent Development, what used to be ASTD, as Certified Professional in Talent Development. Enough about us. John, would you like to kick us off talking about where we got our data and what we're finding?
Sure. Thanks, Sandie. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. So the state of hiring, it's changed dramatically in the last few years, based in large part because of the pandemic, and there have been a lot of challenges inherently focused on that. And so Wiley Publishing has, they do behavioral assessments, and a number of them, and some are related to hiring, which is extremely pertinent right now. So basically, we're going to do an overview of a recent survey and the people that were surveyed and why they were chosen. Basically, 3,000 plus HR hiring managers took part in the survey. And this happened at the end of 2020. So the results were, I think, summarized early 21. And I think in large part, this was done to get a handle on exactly what the challenges were in hiring people in a very tight job market. Next slide. So from that report, there were 3 major areas that were gleaned from that were presenting challenges to hiring managers. And those will be identified. Those challenges needed to be identified. There are 3 actions that need to be addressed in order to build back better than before. How do we do that? And then objective, reliable, and accurate data. Next slide, please. So, insights from the survey for hiring managers. some very interesting statistics here. I think you'll find surprising to some degree. So hiring managers, folks that were surveyed, reported challenges with determining which candidate will be the best fit. That was 83%. So this is greater than 4 out of 5. We're having a hard time finding the right fit in terms of the candidates that they were looking at. 3/4 of the hiring managers face challenges with aligning colleagues and or recruiters on job requirements, which is interesting because typically hiring managers do rely on data, resumes, job descriptions, and so forth. But they were running into problems based on probably the nature of the hiring process being remote, being virtual, and this probably created some discrepancy in the way they were looking at potential candidates. Nearly 70% reported challenges with knowing which topics to focus on during interviews, which is kind of got to be surprising to people. Typically, you would be pretty well prepared and well versed in what areas to focus on in terms of questions you're asking. But again, because the hiring process and really job candidate search was a little bit turned upside down during the pandemic, this created a much higher challenge for hiring folks. And then nearly 4 out of 5 reported challenges with onboarding new hires. So not only were they having challenges finding the right people, creating the right processes to identify the right candidates, but then, which is as or more important, once they're hired, they were faced with difficult challenges onboarding those new hires. Next slide. So fast forward to now, to where we are now, coming out of the pandemic to a degree, the landscape changing on the hiring process, candidate pool certainly changing to some degree as well. A lot of people have backed away, changed vocations, gone into business for themselves, but the whole landscape has changed. And so what are the hiring challenges of 2023 as a result of what we've been through? Well, increasingly difficult time attracting and retaining employees who have the skills needed to fill those open jobs. 600 HR professionals surveyed by Wiley indicated almost 7 out of 10 said that their organizations had a skills gap. And that's up 14% from 2021. So basically 7 out of 10 said there was some skills gap. Great quote here from an executive at Wiley, basically saying this widening of the skills gap is concerning and not likely to end soon. So it's going to be ongoing. The demand for skills keeps evolving faster, and it's increasingly hard for companies and higher education institutions, particularly, to keep up when it comes to soft skills. Indeed, there's now a greater demand for soft skills over hard skills. So that's a bit of a flip. Hard skills being primarily job-related competencies required to do the work, to fulfill the role. Soft skills being those personal qualities and traits that impact the work that you do. Next slide. So the result of this is that 10% of the open roles positions went unfilled. And furthermore, 20% went unfilled if a skills gap was identified or present. And beyond that, it jumps to 40% of hiring managers saying that it takes more time to find candidates. They didn't indicate how much more time, but obviously anytime that process is stretched out, it puts a lot of stress on resources, time away from the roles that you're typically doing. So that's a very telling statistic. Okay, so as a real result of this, how did organizations adapt their hiring practice? Obviously, they need to reshift. They need to come up with a different formula to meet and address what's happening once it's been identified. Next slide. So organizations adapting hiring practices, one of the things is alignment on job requirements. Proper alignment based on the job requirement, on the job description, on the role and responsibility for the candidate that they're looking for. So 65%, 2/3 essentially, have adjusted their approach to how hiring managers align with colleagues and or recruiters on job requirements. This is based on challenges with virtual communication, which everybody basically went through, and some still are, aligning on hiring criteria, making sure you're in alignment with recruiters, with your colleagues. Everybody's on a level playing field in terms of what the criteria is for finding the ideal candidate. And then the difficulty in assessing candidates was also a big challenge. Next slide. So interviewing, okay, the actual crux of the process. Nearly 3/4 of hiring managers have had to adapt their processes for how candidates are assessed. So 3 out of 4 through the interview process. And the challenge is getting to know candidates, knowing the right questions to ask. Apparently they weren't asking the right questions, or they were deviating from the questions that historically they have asked. And we've lost our visual here. There we go. Thank you. And then determining difficulty in determining the job fit, which is crucial. Job fit is always the most qualifying factor. And so knowing that, that's an area that needs to be obviously addressed. And we have a tool that will do that. So the final thing is onboarding. So this is a real issue apparently, because it has to do with basically how well somebody fits within an organization, how engaged they are. But basically, over 80% have shifted how they onboard people. So onboarding is huge. Again, are they the right fit? You can find out fairly quickly if they are through the orientation process and how you bring them on board. Through engagement, training, and sharing of knowledge, which is critically important. And then you have retention issues. So this is interesting because it basically looks at hiring decisions made on going with your instinct versus your data. Data being flatline information that you have, maybe somebody's resume, their work history, factual information about somebody that you can rely on, that's structural. But this says that 65% now, in essence, 2/3 of hiring managers are hiring or relying, more on their instinct or their gut than data when deciding who to hire. And this presents some real issues in terms of fairness, and it makes it more elusive, and it has a tendency to allow us to fall back on our biases, and we all have biases and just how we hire, how we view people, how we see people based on appearances, based on voice inflection, based on background, and so forth. And then the lack of consistency and structure is a problem here because you don't have anything to go back on, and it's not consistent. And so I think one of the things that really they focused on was consistency, because I think that's the one underlying factor that basically levels the playing field, as I mentioned earlier, and how that leads to better outcomes. And as you can see in this graph, they've outlined always consistent, sometimes, and rarely or never consistent. So the confidence in an organizational hiring process based on alignment of job fit is at 86% when they focus on that. Pretty successful. When they have a structured interview process, when they're relying more on data, instinct always kicks in because you have, you create a rapport, and that process is relational, and it should be, but you've got to be more consistent with the factors of what you're relying on in terms of data. So when you do that, your success rate increases to 85%, and then onboarding really skyrockets to 9 out of 10 in terms of when you're consistent, you have a 90% chance of being successful in your onboarding process. So this, I think, leads us through the presentation in terms of leading up to the tool that Sandie's going to talk about that will help hiring managers, that will help you all address some of these issues and challenges that you're having or have had in the past, and enable you to really improve your hiring process. Sandie?
Thank you, John. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them in chat or in the Q&A tab. I'm monitoring that. And Brenda, I see you've been able to join us. If you're able to see those and can help monitor it, that will be great. Any questions or comments before we talk about PXT Select? Okay, I don't see any. So Wiley Publishing is a publisher that's been in business in the U.S. for over 200 years. They have different divisions. They do a lot of business publishing, different authors. They also started doing assessments, publishing, purchasing leading organizations and putting them under their group of companies. And Profiles is one of those that they purchased in 2016 and have continued to support. So PXT Select is Profiles is what the P stands for. It is a hiring and selection tool that is useful for hiring managers, and it will stand up to legal review because it matches a job. So we are not looking at personality, behavioral preferences as the driving force in why you choose to hire someone. You're looking at if their numeric, their verbal, their basic way in which they approach various parts of the job, if that's a good fit. And so you would then, this begins to address some of those critical gaps that showed up in the survey around alignment to job requirements, assessing candidates in an interview process. One of the reports that I'll mention provides interview questions unique for that candidate based on their assessment, which is wonderful, very helpful. And it will also help in onboarding new hires in that there's some coaching guidelines that can be used. So it helps you hire in a much smarter way and make better decisions. There is an input process in which you input job analysis, match it to job description, and we also use information from the Department of Labor to create performance models. So as I said, excuse me, let me take a sip here. The assessment looks at the cognitive ability. And if you are hiring in a position where their verbal and their numeric reasoning is not a critical component, there is a form of this assessment that doesn't include the cognitive piece. It takes about an hour or so to take the assessment. It is iterative. The better you answer questions, the harder questions are passed along to you. So there may be some positions for which you really are more concerned about how their behavioral skills and their interests fit into the job needs. So that is possible to do the PXT Select cognitive or the one without the cognitive. The report fits, we match it to a model. So if you are hiring for a manager on the shop floor, maybe materials management, we can create a performance model based on what you need, what that job requires. We usually work with the hiring manager to discuss that and make sure that that model has the right focus on the various components. And we also, if there is an existing model through the Department of Labor, then we'll match it to that and see how that compares. What we're looking at are these horizontal scales. These are the behavioral skills, just a few of them. So depending on the role, the individual may need to stick to facts in which the indicators would be further colored. These colors are called STENs. These are ranges of importance for that job. And so we would determine with you what this model might look like. Independence, this person can be autonomous, or no, this person needs to be more reliant. This person can be more agreeable, or they need to be steadfast. Depending on your role, that's going to vary. And there are lots of guidelines that we go over with you on how that can be interpreted. So this is created in a virtual process. We have an online portal that the assessment's taken from. You can also have an online portal set up within your organization so that you can deploy the assessments and read them and pull them down and interpret them, and we help you set that up. And it gives you the structured interview questions to ask your potential hires. We suggest people in their hiring process get down to maybe the top 2 or 3, and at that point pull in the assessment tool. We also use this tool internally for succession planning, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So what we're looking at is what's the background for the individual, what skills they have, what skills the company needs, what attitudes, what behaviors, what values, and what the job requires in terms of thinking style, behavioral traits, and interests. And we call this a job fit, pulling those 3 together with this tool. So then you end up with less focus on biases, less focus on your own gut reaction, and more on what this organization really seems to be needing and what the individual brings to the organization. These are some screenshots of the various reports out. So we look at a position and we look at how that person fits within the position. So towards the back is a sample performance model for a position. And as I said, these colored bars are indicating the degree of expression of these various traits needed for that role. That's determined to be the optimal range. When an individual completes an assessment, if you'll notice, the green bars, the blue bars are all in about the same place as for this model. And now what we have showing up is initials. This is where an individual fell compared to our performance model. So we can see if they're a little bit outside the range of what's needed for that job, right in the middle, or perhaps a little less. And then we have a written report that has narrative describing what that means. If an individual has more skills that's needed for the job, perhaps they'll be bored, they'll not be engaged in this job, or if they have fewer skills, then they may be limited in their ability to serve successfully in that role. And then some coaching will be given. In our reports, we also do a comparison report of multiple people against this model, so you can see which people are the best fit. So we use this for selection. For onboarding, it's wonderful if a person has completed this assessment. There's some wonderful coaching tips in the reports for the manager on how to work with an individual, for leadership development, and even there's a sales model for sales focus. So it really does serve a purpose for the entire life cycle. In terms of succession planning, it is possible to run a report for which you have internal employees, and you want to determine who's the best fit for a promotion, a new role that's opening up or one that's become available. If you have a performance model for that role, and those candidates, internal candidates, have completed the assessment, you can run all of those candidates against that role and give you a percentage fit, and it will indicate who is the best fit for that new role. And you can look at coaching information, areas in which there's strengths, areas that need development. And it's a great way for looking at people who are internal and finding out where they're best fit. If you have internal people and you want to know what roles might they fit, you can do the same thing with their report and run it against multiple positions or roles and see what position they may be a best fit. So it really does have a lot of options. It increases confidence for you in the hiring process, because now, instead of just looking at gut reactions and how you felt, how this person perhaps presented themselves in an interview, you may take that into account, but you can also go back and look at the data itself to see how this individual fits within the needs of the organization. So you're going to go all the way up in the 90s for success, and this is what we're finding from Wiley reaching out to current users of this particular tool. We have gone over this fairly quickly to give you an overview of this PXT Select selection tool. We can be available to go through this in much more detail, walk you through the reports, share with you PDF sample reports of all that are available. There's leadership coaching, there's coaching, succession planning, interviewing, comparing individuals against one another. So there are a multitude of reports. When you use a PXT Select assessment, any of the reports come along with that assessment. There's not a new charge for each report. There's one charge for the assessment. It retails for $250. We do have volume discounts. And if you would like to sit in this full-length webinar, we think we need about an hour. We don't have it scheduled yet. It'll probably be in the next 2 to 3 weeks. If you're interested at all, please put your name in the chat or the Q&A, your name and your email, and we will reach out to you when we have that available. If you join us on the webinar, then we would honor a 15% discount on any assessments that you might order. So we are to a point where we're ready to take questions or comments. If anybody has anything to ask about, I see nothing in chat or Q&A. John, do you have anything you would like to add?
No, not really. I think we did go through it comprehensively, even though I think, hitting on the high points of this is a great tool, and you have a lot of experience using this tool, Sandie. I know.
Yes, and we have some people on the call that we've worked with who have used it as well and found it to be very helpful.
And I would think, especially in the job market that we're in right now, it seems to be as challenging as ever, and a bit confusing, because the candidate pool has changed, and it's again, it's through attrition or whatever, it's harder to find the right candidate. So really having all the resources and the proper tools, the assessments available to you just heightens your chance of success. And this is a really great one. And it's very reasonable. But
I'm looking in, thank you, John. I'm looking in the Q&A and I see some notes and some names and emails. Thank you. We certainly will get back in touch with you. And even if we only have one or two, we will still honor having a webinar. There's not a requirement of a number of people. If you're interested, we're happy to work with you and walk you through the tool, show you how this works and how you can use it in your organization. So again, any questions or comments, certainly feel free to reach out. We unfortunately can't increase the number of engineers in the market, but we can help you choose one that fits your job and your needs. I'll say that because I'm working with a client who is really feeling challenged to get engineers, and they need electrical engineers to find electrical engineers. So they're going to university campuses, working with lots of different options to try to pull and find people. Well, if there are no more questions or comments, I'm going to do one more quick chat and see if there's anything else that's cropped up. The chat should be, if you're not able to find the chat, it's if your toolbar is showing up in the Zoho toolbar, there is it looks like a little cartoon talking bubble. If you hover over that, that's chat. And so you can add comments in chat. And there also is a Q&A, which is a blue circle with a little white talking bubble with a question in it. And that's where you get into your Q&A to put your question and answers there. So I'll give everybody a chance to find that and put your question and answers. John and I will stay on for a few more minutes, but this ends our presentation. We did record it, and a copy will be made available to you after the session. Thank you for joining us, and certainly feel free to reach out to us. You've got our individual contact information on the screen, as well as the website for JER HR Group. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you all.